you're not going to just hit your nutrition targets by accident, just like you're not going to find yourself at the gym by accident. Now, I'm a firm believer in finding ways to make things easier for yourself, not making them harder than they need to be. It's not going to be perfect, but it does not need to be. Overall consistency in tracking, but also in your tracking methods, is more important than perfection or precision at the cost of your sanity. Welcome to episode 3 of The Unfiltered Athlete, the show where we get real and honest about training, nutrition, performance, and mindset. I'm Georgia Radley, nutritionist, coach, athlete, and now the host of the Unfiltered Athlete podcast. I'm here to help you fuel smarter, train harder, and actually enjoy the process. Join me as I share practical advice, science-backed strategies, and all the things I learned and got wrong along my journey from starting in the gym as a complete beginner to competing internationally in 2 different sports. In the second part of this 2-part series on how to track macros without losing your mind, I'm covering all the best practical tips and tricks that I use that I've been using with my clients over the years to turn tracking from being a chore into being part of your routine. Now, I'm a firm believer in finding ways to make things easier for yourself, not making them harder than they need to be. And that applies to all areas of life, which is why I want to share this episode. Plus, if you listen to part 1 of this 2-part series on how to track macros without losing your mind, you're already a million steps ahead of most because you've actually laid a solid foundation for the practical tips I'm sharing in this episode to actually be effective. When you skip the mindset part, you're far more likely to jump into action but find yourself very quickly spinning your wheels, feeling frustrated, and not having the mental resilience to persevere and keep a healthy, balanced mindset towards food and tracking as a whole, because it's not going to be perfect, but it does not need to be. So if you haven't already listened to part 1, I've linked it below. Make sure you do give it a listen. But if you have listened, you're ready to put these 5 strategies into practice. Strategies that will allow you to spend less time and energy thinking about tracking and more time actually eating well, feeling fueled, and getting after your goals. So let's get into it. My first essential practical strategy is to lean into the app, and that's whatever app you're using. Now, tracking gets easier the more you use the tools that are available to you. So if we're saying that tracking as a whole is a tool, as I covered in the last episode, let's say that it's actually a Swiss Army knife. And if you were just to use like the corkscrew attachment, you might struggle a bit more than you need to than if you were to use all of the attachments available to you or the mini tools required for their relevant tasks, right? Can you tell I love an analogy? So each tracking app is different, like a slightly different Swiss Army knife, but they all have their own sort of mini tools or mini attachments built in. And I personally use MyFitnessPal because it's one of the apps that syncs and integrates with the most different partner apps. Chronometer is also popular, MacroFactor, NutriCheck off the top of my head. And some of these apps do have some of these features hidden behind a paywall. So check that before you pick one if you haven't already, or before you pick what you're going to pay for if you do want to pay for an app. But each app does have its own features, and I want to highlight some of these features, and these are specific to MyFitnessPal, but I'm sure that a lot of the other apps out there also have their own equivalent or very similar features, and so you're still going to find this useful no matter what app you're using, because there are probably ways to implement these tips using the mini tools available to you within whatever your chosen tracking app is. But the key here, when I've said lean into the app, is that I encourage you to use as many of the features as possible to make your life easier. So I'm going to list the ones that I use all the time to make my life easier. And the first one is the barcode scanner, and most apps have this. It's much easier than searching for a food, scrolling through the options, and that's when it gets it right. The only thing to watch out for is that you very often, especially when you're first starting, will need to double check for accuracy. So just cross-reference the food label with whatever the app is telling you, and also you want to check the portion size. Sometimes you'll scan it and it will automatically come up with, say, 100 grams, but if you're having half a pack or a different portion size, then you'll need to adjust and just make sure, as you would anytime you're tracking, that you are getting the correct portion size in. And the next one, I think this one is massively underused, is the meals feature. And this allows you to input or save combinations of food that you eat often. For example, each ingredient for a specific sandwich, a specific smoothie, or like your morning porridge, and save them as one meal, so that rather than every time you eat that, needing to add each individual ingredient. So it was like a smoothie and you're adding a banana, you're adding your frozen fruit, you're adding milk, you're adding protein powder, you're adding maybe some nut butter, all of those 5 different things, having to search for the ingredients separately. If you save them as a meal, you can just click that and log that. And then if you do need to adjust the specific serving sizes, if you have a slight variation on that, you can do that, but it saves you from having to find each ingredient and log it separately. And if you swap out an ingredient, you can just log that ingredient instead. But overall, this feature just saves a lot of time and brain power. The next one, it's similar, but it is different, is the recipe feature. And this is my go-to feature. And I use it to batch cook and freeze literally upwards of 30 portions of a meal at a time. And I will use similar recipes over and over. But when I'm using the same recipe again, I can always go in and edit and tweak that recipe each time I make a batch. So if I've used a bit more chicken or I want to divide it up into more portions, I can just edit the recipe and the macros will update. But basically, you enter all the ingredients that are going into whatever you're cooking. It's like multiple portions in their bulk quantities. For example, if I'm batch cooking, there might be 2 kilos of chicken in something. So I'm not putting the amount in each serving. I'm not having to do any of the maths. I'm just putting the entire amount into the recipe feature. And then you will type in the number of portions. And then MyFitnessPal will automatically calculate the nutritional information per serving. And what's also quite handy with this is if you are making a recipe and you just want to tweak it slightly to adjust the macros, you can input all the ingredients and then just kind of play around on the app. So you might experiment with the number of portions, or you might experiment with the quantities of the different ingredients to create a meal or a recipe that suits the macro targets that you want. So that's another way to use that feature, as well as the convenience of just being able to input the recipe and log it in one click. It can also help you build recipes and meals that fit your macros. Really convenient, especially for batch cooking. You save it as a recipe, and then when you want to log it, you just log that recipe. It's one entry in your food diary, one click, saves you from doing any of the maths, and it saves you from entering the ingredients manually each time. So that's a feature I absolutely love. Another great feature is the quick add, and this is where you can just quickly add calories, which is really ideal for approximating, like if you're eating out but you want to stay consistent with your tracking as much as you can. Even if you can't scan or be aware of the exact food, you can approximate the calories, and this just means that you won't have really big gaps in your data at the end of the week. Or you can add calories and macros, but only if you have the paid version of MyFitnessPal Premium. But you can also get around this on the free version of MyFitnessPal by using the Create a Food feature. It's not quite as quick, but this Create a Food feature is also a really handy tool in its own right, and an important one to know about for occasions where the food that you're looking for isn't in the database or the information in the database is incorrect. So you can literally create a food, include the name, serving size, the brand, and all the nutritional information, and that's for any food that you want. So that is the quick add and create a food features. They're quite similar, but they do have their differences. The next one, a big time saver, is basically a copy and paste feature, and a lot of apps will allow you to copy a food or an entire meal to another day, which is perfect for anything you eat on repeat, like a regular breakfast, something you've meal prepped, or go-to snacks. It's just another nice time saver, and it can save a little bit of mental energy too. And then finally, your history. This one might sound obvious, but when you go to log a food, all of your most recently logged foods will appear, so you don't need to search them every time. But even if you do search for something like chicken breast, for example, it will still come up with whichever version of this food entry you've used most recently. So you're consistently tracking the same food with the same nutritional information, rather than using a different food entry from MyFitnessPal's database for the same food, which can kind of just introduce unreliability into your tracking data. So they are the main tips I have for strategy number 1, leaning into the app. And I know that's a fair chunk of information, and all of those features are covered within my ultimate guide to tracking with MyFitnessPal, which I will link below if you want a written guide with screenshots to walk you through all of it. But whether you use that or not, I want to reassure you that if you are starting out or you haven't quite got into the swing of things yet, that it is normal for tracking to take a little bit longer at first. It will take some time, but if you can be patient and get over the hump, usually like the first week or two, you'll find you're eating a lot of the same foods, you'll be logging them on repeat, and everything just gets a lot faster and more efficient when you are using those handy features that I've talked about just now. Okay, so let's talk strategy number 2, and that is to balance accuracy with consistency. Now, speaking of being efficient with the last tip, tracking accurately is obviously important. If you're spending time tracking, you need to be accurate enough that it's going to be worthwhile. And being inaccurate and not tracking properly is one of the biggest reasons that I see people end up feeling like tracking just doesn't work for me. And this is because the data that they're getting isn't actually a reflection of what they're eating. But at the same time, the prospect of needing to weigh every single thing can feel a bit daunting and time consuming. So let's talk about how to make accurate tracking your default and how to balance trying to be accurate with being consistent and realistic and not having to spend loads of time and energy obsessing over tracking and weighing everything to the gram. And so speaking of weighing things, my first tip is getting familiar with weighing food, because you will need to weigh food. And what you'll want is a solid set of digital scales. And I recommend actually keeping these on the counter or at least in a top drawer. And this might sound silly, but you just want to reduce any friction points or resistance in tracking and weighing your food. So then when you're using the scales, you want to weigh your food directly onto the plate or the bowl, whatever you're having your food on. You're going to put the plate on the scales, use the tare button to set the scale to 0 and weigh directly onto the plate. And this just means that you're not really having to put any more effort into it than if you weren't weighing. Like the difference between free pouring a bowl of cereal off the scales versus putting your bowl on the scale and pouring the cereal into the bowl and weighing it is a few seconds, and you're not creating any more washing up. And then the other way to do this is to actually put the food item itself on the scale, zero the scale, and weigh the food out of that container. And this can work for things like a drizzle of honey or some nut butter. You'll just have a negative number on the scale instead of a positive one. So they're my tips on weighing, making it as easy as possible. And weighing is important. It is a little bit more effort than not weighing, but you can make it fairly frictionless and get consistent with it by being strategic, making it as simple and easy as possible for yourself. And then another way that we want to balance accuracy and consistency is not stressing over micromanaging minor changes. So whilst yes, there is a time and place to get granular, like we want to be accurate with our weighing, and like maybe when you're weighing calorie dense foods or you're in the depths of a deficit and needing to be as precise as possible, but we don't want to be micromanaging every single variation. Like you don't want to be creating a brand new food entry in MyFitnessPal just because you bought a different supermarket's brand of raw chicken breast and their label was slightly different. So consistently using the same food entries where appropriate is a really simple way to support accuracy without having to stress over tiny fluctuations, especially when we're talking about unprocessed foods like meat, fish, eggs, fruit and veg, because there is natural variation in their nutritional content anyway. Like different supermarkets will have slightly different nutrition facts on their labels for the same equivalent foods, and we can't say that one is more accurate than the other because the food is going to naturally have some level of variation. The only thing you do want to watch out for with this is things like when the nutritional information is actually given for, as an example, 100 grams as cooked per instructions, which might involve adding oil, or it might be giving you the cooked weight rather than the raw weight. So just make sure you are checking that the nutritional information on the packaging is lining up with the way you are measuring it. But the key takeaway here is that overall consistency in tracking, but also in your tracking methods, is more important than perfection or precision at the cost of your sanity. And then the last tip under this umbrella of balancing accuracy with consistency is knowing when to estimate. If you're just getting started with tracking and you're still learning what nutrients are in what foods or what certain weights of certain foods look like, then estimating is going to be less favourable, although still probably better than leaving your food log blank because, again, you're trying to get that full picture of the data. But say you are more practiced or you're in a surplus or maintenance rather than in a deficit where you might want to be a little bit more precise with things, you might lean into estimating certain foods when it makes sense to. For a lot of people, no matter what phase they're in, approximating portion sizes of vegetables, with the exception of high carb ones like root vegetables, is a really simple way to do this. And personally, I can't remember the last time I actually weighed a serving of broccoli. I will just type in broccoli on MyFitnessPal and I will go with an approximate measure of cups or whatever units it's in. And that is because broccoli is not very calorie dense, and I know this from my experience with tracking, so I know that if I have a slightly bigger or slightly smaller portion, it's not going to make a big impact on my overall calories and macros for that day. What I do recommend though is weighing out fruit, especially earlier in your tracking journey. And then as you get more experience, you might not weigh certain fruits, like self-contained things, I don't know how else to put that, things like apples, bananas and pears. You might find that the sort of generic size-based portions that MyFitnessPal or your tracking app has are accurate enough, or that you're maybe happy to eyeball your portion of watermelon because it's so low calorie that it barely makes a difference, whilst continuing to weigh other fruits like grapes, mango, or pineapple because a smaller variation in portion size might have a bigger impact on your overall nutrition intake for the day. And you also might get more precise with weighing during different nutrition phases depending on your goals. So to recap this second practical strategy of balancing accuracy with consistency, you're going to make weighing your food simple by using the TARE method and keeping scales to hand. You're not going to micromanage every small variation, especially with minimally processed foods. And you're going to be smart about using estimates to save time when it makes sense and when you've gained the experience to do so. Now let's get into strategy number 3. And this is maybe my favorite one to talk about, and that's plan ahead, but not perfectly. So far, I've talked about tracking in the sense of tracking what you have already eaten. And yes, when you get started, this is usually the way to do it. And it can be great for helping you spot your habits and your eating patterns. But once you're ready to make some changes, you're going to need to start treating MyFitnessPal or your chosen app as less of a tracker that you use to record what you've eaten after the fact and as more of a planner. Because you're not going to just hit your nutrition targets by accident, just like you're not going to find yourself at the gym by accident. But the two essentials with planning are, number one, you need a strategy for how and when you're going to plan, just like you need a plan for when you're going to go to the gym and how you're going to fit it into your schedule. And number two, you need to understand that your plan is not rigid, but it's a starting point. You don't necessarily need to stick to it 100%, but if you've planned things out and deviate slightly, you're still probably going to be 75% of the way there compared to if you hadn't planned at all and you're nowhere near your target. So bear that in mind when you are planning. And to use that gym analogy again, this is like going to the gym, having a training plan to follow, but then someone is using the piece of equipment or the machine that you were planning to use. So you swap out an exercise, but even though you hadn't done the exact workout that you planned, or maybe in the exact order, the end result is that you pretty much got it done. So back to that first point, how are you going to plan? How are you going to make that a consistent routine? Well, first off, I recommend checking on a daily basis your daily food log anyway. So you could turn this into part of your evening routine. So for example, you brush your teeth, you check your tracking for the day, and at the same time log tomorrow's food. Or you could set an alarm reminder at a time in the evening that makes sense for you, maybe like an hour before bed. Some people prefer to do it in the morning, the planning for the day, like pair it with your morning coffee, but I would just say be mindful of your appetite patterns, because personally, I'm always very hungry in the morning and my brain isn't fully fired up. So it's not the best time for me to be sensible and strategic with my nutrition planning. And then another strategy, if you like to get a bit further ahead, is to do your planning on a weekly basis, or a middle ground is once every few days. So you're doing it in chunks, which can also be really handy if you're meal prepping and trying to coordinate things with your food shopping. But you just need to make sure that you're allocating time on your calendar or with reminders on your phone to make sure that this planning process actually happens. So it's not just this nice idea that you're going to do it on a certain day, it's actually a plan, and you're still going to need to double check your tracking each evening or each day for completeness and accuracy for best results. So that is the first essential to planning ahead. The second part, as I mentioned, is that whatever plan you're making doesn't need to be rigid, and you don't necessarily need to stick to it 100%. Although if you do, great, well done. But when I say that, it might mean that you plan out all of your food but end up eating something different, like maybe plans changed or something was on offer when you went to the shops. But another form of this flexible planning is deliberately leaving gaps to allow something spontaneous, something unplanned, or to kind of roll with your appetite and cravings. And I kind of see this as almost a bonus mindset tip as well as a practical one, because it helps you balance the planning and intention required to get results with the flexibility that's required to be able to maintain a healthy mindset with tracking. So you might, for example, plan 3 main meals and leave deliberate gaps for snacks, but you might not necessarily plan exactly what the snack is going to be. Just make sure that if you do this, there are some options available for you at home that you could fit in here. So it's not a case of, oh, I was going to have a snack then, but the only thing available to me is a huge chocolate bar. And then the final part of this planning strategy is that whatever plan you make, it needs to be realistic. And leaving gaps is one way to help with this, but other things to think about are like, don't craft yourself a meticulous meal plan that you won't have time to meal prep, or that contains a load of food that you don't even enjoy, or that you know isn't going to leave you feeling full or satisfied. Make sure it's actually something you can see yourself sticking to. And that is strategy strategy number 3, plan ahead, but not perfectly. Let's move on to strategy number 4, prep for success. And this one ties very nicely into what I've just talked about, because you might have planned and you might have been using all these strategies, but sometimes things change. You eat differently to what you planned, or even the chicken that you were going to have for lunch has gone off before it was supposed to, or someone ate the strawberries that you'd been looking forward to all morning and now you want to cry about it. But this strategy is all about preparing for these kinds of moments. And here is how. You're going to keep a range of macro top-ups in the house, including ones with a longer shelf life, so that you have backup options. If plan A, your original meal plan, doesn't happen, you've still got ways to eat for your goals. And this isn't just for when plans change, it's also really handy for any time that you just need a really lazy meal or snack, or you're at the end of the day and you're short on one macro and you need to top it up. So for protein, cooked meats are great, and you can buy it pre-cooked or batch cook at the start of the week. Beef jerky for something that lasts longer, tinned fish again for shelf life, skyr yogurt or Greek yogurt, protein puddings, bars, shakes, and eggs. And different options work better for different occasions. So for those shorter shelf life ones, it might be that you include them in your weekly shop, and then other things you just make sure that there's always something stocked up in the cupboard. Moving on to carbs, the obvious one is fruit, fresh, frozen, dried, or tinned, depending on what you need, because you might pick something different if you need a quick, sugary, pre-training carb top-up versus if you're looking for some complex carbs to give you sustained energy all throughout the morning. Then there's rice cakes, air-popped or microwave popcorn, cereals, and breads are also really easy ways to top up carbs without making much of a dent in your other macros if you've already hit your protein and fat targets. And then finally, for fats, nuts, nut butter, and dark chocolate are all things that keep very well. And with fats, you really don't need a large quantity to be able to get those extra grams in. So the idea with strategy 4 is that you don't need to meal prep everything, and every meal does not need to be like a grand spectacle. But the idea is to keep it simple. Prepare your backup options, and remember that sometimes it is okay to just grab what's available, provided you enjoy it and it feels good for you. The 5th practical strategy to help you track without losing your mind, and actually I think I lied because this might just be my favorite one, is to repeat and recycle. And I cannot stress this enough. You do not need to reinvent the wheel every day. Of course, you need enough variety to give you a range of nutrients and to stop you from getting bored, but repeating meals and even entire days of eating is one of the easiest ways to save time, save energy, and actually be able to hit your targets more consistently. So here are a few ways that you can use this idea. The first thing you can do is to look back on days that you've already tracked. Look at what days have you hit your targets or been close to targets. And maybe you're just starting out and you've been struggling with protein targets, but you're hitting your protein target on some days. So you would then look at what you've eaten on those days and then use that information when you're planning ahead to help you hit targets in future without having to figure it all out from scratch. So you look at the foods that are helping you hit your protein targets and try to repeat and do more of that. So maybe you go ahead and build your meals around the protein sources that you've had on those days and then just tweak the other things to fit. And then another way that you can use this repeat and recycle method is to literally copy what you ate across entire days where you hit your targets, or maybe just days where you felt really good and your appetite was regulated or you felt energized, and you're literally just going to copy that and repeat it when you're doing your plan. Now, obviously, you don't want to literally eat the same thing every single day with no changes, but you can use that as a template and then make minor tweaks if you need more variation, whether that's to keep you from getting bored or to make sure you're getting a wide enough range of nutrients by eating plenty of different foods, because if you have a really limited number of foods that you're eating from, even if they're really nutritious foods, you still need a variety to get the full spectrum of vitamins and minerals that you need to be healthy. But the key thing is that you're making tweaks, not starting all over again from scratch. And then I kind of touched on this one earlier when I was talking about the recipe feature, but you can use this idea as well to start tweaking and just making small adjustments to help you hit your targets whilst still using your usual foods and recipes if you want to. For example, you might copy across a meal, but just adjust the portion sizes to maybe increase the protein content but decrease the fat content. And because you're building this knowledge and experience from tracking, you will be able to start identifying what foods are high in what macros, and then the process of making these tweaks becomes pretty simple rather than being a case of guesswork. So to reiterate, strategy number 5 is be lazy and repeat what works. It really is that simple. Now, last but not least, strategy number 6 is eat out with intention. And I really wanted to include this here because it's one of the things that I think is rarely covered when it comes to talking about tracking. It's almost assumed that you're just not going to eat out and not going to eat anything that's outside of your prepped and planned meals. But ultimately, if you want to live a life that is truly balanced, which is what I encourage, even if you've got like crazy performance goals, like I'm talking about your physical health, your social and emotional well-being, then food and in some circumstances alcohol are a very normal part of a balanced life. So rather than ignoring this fact, you're better off anticipating it and planning for it and learning how to be able to take it in your stride and manage it. And eating out on the whole is such a big topic that there's an entire guide on it inside the Athlete Nutrition Blueprint. And if you'd like me to do an entire podcast episode on managing meals out and social occasions, please let me know in the comments or shoot me a DM. But of course, I am going to give you some starting points today. So first up, where available, you're simply going to refer to the restaurant's own nutrition info. Quite often, especially chains, will have the full breakdown, including the macros of their menus online. So it's not just the calories on the physical menus that are like required by law in a lot of places now. You can often go online and find the full nutritional breakdown. And you might just use this to choose a meal, but another way you can use this is to make smart substitutions with side dishes, for example. So if you know the nutritional information for a portion of chips versus a portion of steamed veg, you could make the swap and be able to track it relatively accurately rather than just relying on guesswork by asking for a salad instead of chips. Now, of course, this isn't always possible, whether it's because of where you're eating or it's a case of like you're eating at a friend's house or someone else is cooking for you. So in these scenarios, the next best option you have, providing your goal is to have a complete and as accurate as possible picture of the data, is to estimate. Erring towards overestimating, because it's important to know that restaurants do tend to use more cooking oil for flavour, even adding more sugar as well. So the version of that meal that you might cook at home is going to be lower in calories and often lower in fat than the version of that meal that you're going to eat at a restaurant. So you might need to just allow a little bit of an overestimation. Don't assume that the macros will be exactly the same as if you cooked it at home. And then finally, you do have the option to simply leave a gap and move on. And this again comes down to what your priorities are, what your mindset is like, and it only works if you actually do move on rather than get fixated and spiral because you think you've undone all your hard work with one meal. And I kind of talked about that quite a lot in the previous episode. So don't try to compensate or make up for it. Just return to doing all the other tips I've given you and proceed as normal. And this works best when you're eating out very occasionally. If you're eating out regularly and not being mindful with your choices, then you might need to either dial it in a bit with your tracking or use this bonus strategy, which is creating a calorie buffer. Now, this is typically best for, as I said, if you're eating out more often or you're in a calorie deficit. And in short, you create a strategic calorie buffer by eating around 50 to 100 calories less each day leading up to your meal out. So you're banking some additional calories to eat a bit more on your meal out while still being in line with your overall targets on average for the week. And this strategy is only going to work with the right mindset. It's not about restriction, and we don't want to get into the habit of under eating during the week and then binging on the weekends and doing that every single week, which is why I recommend no more than 100 calories. And you want to be doing this across 5 to 6 days rather than having like 1 or 2 days where you drastically undereat to try to sort of give yourself more calories. That's going to feed into much more of a restrict and binge cycle. So we're aiming for nothing extreme, and this can just help some people balance eating out without stress, being able to enjoy some more indulgent options or maybe a couple of drinks while still working towards the overall goals, especially if, for example, regular meals out are part of your work or social life that you either can't or are not willing to give up. So that final strategy was to eat out with intention. And that is the last of my practical tips for tracking your food without losing your mind. So let's do a little recap of the 6 strategies I've given you so that you're crystal clear on exactly what tips and tricks you're walking away with ready to implement today. Number 1 is to lean into all the tools available to you in your tracking app. Features like saved meals, barcode scanners, and recipes. Number 2 is to balance accuracy and consistency by making accuracy your default setting. Make it easy to be accurate through simple strategies like weighing your food directly onto the scale, but also allowing yourself some leeway by approximating certain lower calorie foods like veg. Number 3 is that you're going to plan ahead, but you're going to make those plans realistic. Make it something you'll actually be able to stick to and leave room for flexibility, because remember that a plan followed 75% is better than not having any plan at all. Number 4 is to prep for success. You're going to stock macro-friendly grab and go options at all times so you're prepared even when plans change or you're short on certain macros. Number 5 is to repeat what works. Meals, snacks, and entire days, and use your own own tracking to help you make improvements rather than trying to start from scratch every time you're trying to plan your meals ahead. And then the final one, number 6, is that you're going to plan how you'll approach meals out and social occasions so that you're balancing your nutrition goals with being able to enjoy treats and flexibility. You don't need to avoid eating out, but you do need to do it with intention if you're serious about making some major changes to your nutrition. And that, my friends, brings this 2-part series on how to track macros without losing your mind to a close. I would love to hear which of the strategies in this episode you are most looking forward to putting into practice, or which of the mindset tips you found the most helpful. You can get in touch via my website or social media, which I've linked below, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can just drop a comment. I'd also love if you could subscribe. It means that you won't miss the next episode, but it also helps other people discover the Unfiltered Athlete, so I can help more people on their paths to becoming healthier, fitter, stronger, and more confident. Don't forget that you can rate and leave a review as well. Why not let myself and others know how these episodes have helped you so far? And on that note, next week I'm continuing the tracking theme, but I'm teaching you how to figure out exactly how much you need to be eating for your goals, shedding a light on the exact strategy that I use with my clients and inside the Athlete Nutrition Blueprint, which, by the way, I've linked in the show notes if you want to find out more about how I can help you match your nutrition with your training. And finally, if you're feeling a bit stuck, a bit frustrated, or a bit lost when it comes to your progress, I've got a completely free tool for you. It's called the Train Assessment, and it's a 2-minute quiz that I designed to help you get unstuck by asking you questions about everything from your training to your nutrition to your mindset, and then giving you a personalized report full of actionable tips and strategies that you can implement straight away to start seeing and feeling progress. And again, you can find all the details for how to take that free quiz below in the show notes. It has been so good to have you here for another episode. I'm having so much fun with this journey so far, and I will see you in the next episode of The Unfiltered Athlete.